You're listening to Techsuite for the C-suite, where we bridge the gap between technology and executives. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you for coming on. For all the listeners, you've been into marketing for such a long, long time. It's kind of really cool seeing you. You're around. You've been in crypto also for a while, but I feel like you're way more of a technologist, a people's person, and like a general human trend spotter than you're a pure just crypto technologist play. So
Yep.
it's really interesting. If you don't mind, would you please give a short intro?
Yeah. No, thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been in marketing a long time. Question for you: do you remember MySpace?
I'm a little too young for that.
So that was the first social media platform that I started marketing on. It was 2005 MySpace. So in a way, you can say that I've been doing. So at the time, there wasn't even the term social media marketing. Like that
Yeah,
didn't exist. It was just kind of like social media. So there was no like social media marketing. There was no community management in that sense. None of that. Nobody talked about any of that stuff. So yeah, I've been doing the marketing slash specifically social media content marketing for 20 years. That's
dude,
that's the short intro.
dude.
And then
What,
there's
what,
a lot of stuff that happened in between those
so
20.
what do you think I did in 2005?
Uh, were you in like middle school?
I
Or
wasn't
no,
even in middle school.
were you born? How old are
No,
you?
I'm born in 2000.
Okay,
Um,
so you're like just getting out of diapers. You're learning to crack and poop
basically,
on your own.
basically, yeah, yeah. So like you're basically running marketing longer than I'm alive.
Yeah,
Or, yeah,
close.
it's actually accurate.
No.
That's madness. Like, I have one really good friend who's in his 60s, which is always a very fascinating conversation because he has so much experience, and I'm able to break down the technology for him. So this exchange is always great. Where it's like, okay, now here's all of this experiences and all of this, like, okay, this is how it works, and
Yeah.
here's all the new shit broken down into business lingo so he can pattern match.
Yeah. Well, I mean that sort of stuff. Like, I'm not a technical person. You and I kind of got connected through Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox is
Shout out.
super technical, at least to me. He's
No,
incredibly
he is,
technical.
he is.
Um, And so he and I have always had, I think he tagged me in a post talking about the Telegram
Yep.
blockchain and kind of some ecosystem stuff. And that really, what he was tagging me, he was referencing a conversation where we had where he was kind of telling me sort of what was going on from a technical standpoint within the ecosystem. And then I'm just thinking back to the last 20 years of watching technology companies get built, consumer behavior, the internet kind of come to life, and I'm just like, here's what I think will happen. And his when he tagged me, he was like, "Yeah, Jeff was right." Um,
Yep.
Jeff kind of predicted it, and it didn't come from. It came from him kind of telling me what was happening from a technical standpoint, and then me just saying, "Okay, well, based off of the last 20 years, I think it could play out like this."
Yeah. There's, it also gets into when we were talking earlier. You said you're way more into the human side of the crypto than into the actual industry itself, in the
Yeah.
like way you think, which goes back to incentives to me. It's like crypto is with it all being hyper financialized. It's this like purest play on incentives, and you're just going straight to the incentives.
Yep. Actually, as I was thinking about the how we got connected and what we might talk about, incentives was probably the number one word because that was how I kind of outlined. And we might as well say like, okay, Telegram, has created this incredible ecosystem for all these mini apps to thrive, and they allowed all these sort of different chains and protocols to for mini apps to be built on top of them. But then they had this like their own chain, TOC, kind of over on the side, and it was basically like, I was telling Matthew, I was like, hey, if they've got their own chain, it is only a matter of time before they prioritize that chain, and it's going to happen way
Yep.
quicker and way in a way more inconvenient way than people think it's going to happen. And, there was kind of a debate on when. Matthew was like, oh, it's going to take years kind of before that. And then it's going to kind of phase through, and it's going to they're going to prioritize, they're going to start to kind of deprioritize. And really what happened is it was like 2 months later from when we had the conversation, and it wasn't a phased approach. It was a Band-Aid ripoff, and it was TOC is the only blockchain. Our blockchain is what you have to build on. Screw everything else, and just basically wiped out this whole mini app ecosystem and say you have to focus on here. But you could predict that because they're invested in that. They have a vested interest in TOC, their chain, succeeding, and it's only a matter of time that they use the power of this big Telegram app and all its users to force people and developers onto their chain and make their money. That's it.
It's well, they also have a large community in their open messaging protocol, in their messaging platform called Telegram, the app. Which, interestingly, if you look at Facebook and Meta as a company, they haven't been really able to drive business on WhatsApp. They're doing a lot of business channels, and the pop-up I always see, because I'm using WhatsApp for business, I always see a pop-up to run ads on Facebook to get messages through WhatsApp. So there's no direct WhatsApp monetization channel. So Telegram has premium features, but I know very little people who actually pay for that. And looking at the numbers, it's around 1 to 2% of that. Which if you have to host video, because people are allowed to send video back and forth, that's a lot of money that you're burning.
Yeah. No, that all makes sense. The incentives are how things play out. And you kind of mentioned my focus on kind of the human side. The thing about, my being a marketer and then being also someone who's super passionate about technology, wants to just live in a sci-fi book full time, but also my skill set is marketing, content marketing, social media. Something that hasn't changed is the human brain has not changed. The human brain and the emotions. And so and I see a lot of this in the crypto space, even more so than early Silicon Valley actually had this same mentality, and it kind of grew up. But this mentality of, for crypto specifically, we're changing the financial system. We're totally reinventing this financial system. So then these founders and these teams take that same thought and they want to apply it to everything. Okay, well, if we're completely changing the financial system, then we have to completely change marketing.
Well,
and it's
well, don't get me wrong, we're actually doing that. We're just gifting so many people so much money to use the products that it actually changed the way marketing works, because usually you have an incentive for people to come and then they come and pay you.
Yeah.
So we completely changed that script.
Well, it's true. And there's been a few examples where, the Uniswap airdrop, I think was one of the best examples of, hey, we distributed ownership, but I don't call that changing marketing. I think that's more of just a business ownership.
Well, a lot of them, quote unquote, have foundations or government structures, but if you look at them, they're not really the ones driving the discourse. It's still the lab, the company driving the discourse. You don't get equity in the company for legal reasons, but still,
right.
It's kind of entrenched that you don't have to give that out to have a proxy vehicle for people to speculate on, which means you get to retain all of your company, and you get the financial upside from a liquidity event. So it's like having an IPO without giving up shares. What?
Yeah. Well, and that's where maybe the new regulatory environment, at least in the U.S., in terms of how Trump's kind of leading that, will potentially change and say, oh, you can actually give out equity via tokens. That's okay. And I really want that to happen, because if you just look at the course of business history for the last 1,000 years, you went from we all know this, kings and dictatorships to, the greatest innovation in Silicon Valley in the 60s was, hey, let's give our employees shares of the company. And now we're just going one step further and saying, no, we should actually we should make sure that our customers have shares of the company.
Yeah.
Now that some people say that that's kind of marketing. I don't think that's marketing. I think that's more of like a business ownership kind of structure. And then a lot of these tokens that are given out, guess what? That's actually just points. It's just
Yeah,
tradable
yeah,
points. So it's
yep.
not, and really, like, if a car wash gave me points, like, technically, and my neighbor down the street had points for a fast food chain, and we wanted to, we're having beers on our patios and we wanted to trade our points, we could do that. So, like, there's nothing sort of technically, I don't know. I don't see a lot of new stuff from the term. There's a tweet the other day. This guy he got a ton of likes, like hundreds of retweets, and he was talking about, this new way of marketing, and, you empower a customer and then they talk to another potential customer and they bring them into the community and they kind of do all that stuff. And I was like, I kind of trolled him in a nice way. And I was like, yeah, word of mouth has worked for a long time. There's just different technical ways now. Like, you can generate word of mouth through different technical levers, but the concept. And so when I think of marketing, I go way up to concepts first, and then tactically, okay, well, you would have done this concept tactically different. You would have done it in the 80s different than you do it now. And you did it different in 2005 with MySpace, but at the concept level, nothing is different. It's all the same.
No, for me, that totally aligns. Where what we're doing is we're making certain things easier, so a lot of the flywheel just gets faster and gets greased. So it's like, well, you wanted to go from a small town into the city. Well, that meant a 2-day walk. Well, now
Right.
it's a 2-hour car drive. In a few years, that may just be you not even driving anymore. So it's just like you laying flat and like enjoying yourself or eating for 2 hours, and then you're in the
Right.
city well rested. You get out, and you actually have all the time at home. It's like we're
It's still transportation.
yes,
It's
nothing
still
nothing has
transportation.
changed. You have a reason why you want to go from point A to point B. Well, now though, because you're able to get there so fast, you may find more reasons to go more often, because the resistance is decreased. So, like, to your example with the loyalty points, if a friend of mine has airline points and I want to use them to fly out to a conference, and upgrade on the way back, so I can actually sleep and like be well rested when I'm coming back from the conference, uh, then I currently have no real way of going and getting those points besides some like eBay marketplace or some other stuff. If that would now all reside on this like global distributed database that we can all share called a blockchain, then I can actually trade that with my friend. He gets money because that's as part of that exchange, and I have the points. I can use them, and we're all good. The airline is happy because they're getting a customer in business, and if I like it, I may just do that way more. They got the revenue from the points, and they will get more revenue
Right.
through the points because people now get a value out of the points, even if they don't fly.
Right.
Which means they get the marketing of people signing up to get the points because there's more value add.
Right.
Which is the most confusing part. People say like, "Oh, I want my points siloed." No, actually, you don't. You want your points used.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. You want your points used and you want new customers and all that stuff. So I'm super excited about where the space is going, especially, I guess, for someone who was in marketing for a long time, did basically a Web 2 type career. My main role between 2009, because the 2005 story, that was me in college. My
Yeah.
first client was a MySpace client. Um, 2009 to 2021 was basically social media digital transformation. So, I was the guy that went in 2009 and was like, okay, here's Facebook. And in 2012, here's Facebook and Instagram and ads and organic and how this all kind of works together.
It,
And mobile, super important. So that was me from like 2009 to 2021 when I left to do crypto sort of full time. And when I look at when I kind of reflect on the last few years of crypto, 2021, well, I was deep in the space in 2020. I was basically like working but spending all my time doing crypto stuff while I was at the
stuff.
agency. Yeah. Um, But when I fully like went out on my own in 2021, and I reflect on the last few years, there's a couple things that I anticipated. One, technology adoption just always takes longer than people expect. When I look back in 2005, my young sort of self, and I'm looking at social media, and I'm just like, before the whole industry had blossomed, I could see the whole thing. And I was like, this is how it's going to work. We're going to elect presidents based off of social media conversation. And like, if I say that in 2005, people are like, dude, you're out of your mind. Lo and behold, that's where we eventually got to.
But
It
that's
just,
20 years later, though. To put it in context, 2016 was when people were discussing kind of like people playing around with the elections for the first time, but still didn't
exactly.
grasp that the actual conversation was happening on there, because it is more that your living room has shifted there, but it's like nobody is inside your living room. Well, now it's like this is actually full on has become the TV with like podcast hosts and all of it. So now the conversation is really there and people have gotten it.
Yeah.
So now you don't have to sell it anymore. While in 2016 you still would have to sell it to
Yeah.
the parties. And I feel like
So it's like a 15 to 20 year sort of evolution. And then, in terms of like talking to brands, so like my first client on Facebook was Fruit of the Loom. I don't know. Do you know who that is?
I've heard the name. I've heard
They're
the
like
name.
they're like the second largest producer of underwear. Like when you think of like Walmart, and you go into Walmart, there's Hanes. Are you familiar with Hanes?
I've heard the name. I'm not too
These are
familiar.
US these are US companies, but basically it's like when you go into Walmart, there's two underwear brands. It's Hanes and Fruit
Okay.
of the Loom.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, these are huge, huge companies. But like talking to those big companies and getting them to transition onto like social media and be like social media first, even when like what we were just talking about, it took until 2020, 2024, 2016 for the conversations to kind of start. In 20 Between 2012 and 2015 was the fucking golden era to capture, to arbitrage social media. So it arrived, totally arrived, and you could scale and impact the world and do crazy stuff in 2013 and 2014 and 2015, but only the startups were doing it. And even though you had the potential to shape an election, I think in 2020, 2012, 2013, granted the election cycles kind of, skip over some opportunities. The bigger opportunities would have been more like 2014. But the people in power didn't adopt it, and they end up adopting it basically 10 years after uh, the reality is sort of there. And now I'm a big believer in things are speeding up, technology is speeding up. It does cause human behavior to speed up. Information is faster now. So if you go back and you look at how social media spread, how does social media spread before social media exists?
Yep.
Right? Ask that question. Well, it spread via email, TV, word of mouth.
Yep. For me, it was word of mouth in a classroom.
Yeah, exactly. So then you fast forward and say we now with social media, information moves at almost the speed of like, bits and, data, because that's really
On a technical level, it actually moves at the speed of light when we're talking like fiber
yeah,
optics.
yeah, there you
which,
go.
which is the
And
fastest you can humanly, like physically go.
yeah, so the fact that now new technology has the benefit of spreading via social media, which is a form of communication that moves faster than any other form of communication, that does mean that things get adopted sooner. And so I do think that like blockchain and crypto, the adoption curve does happen sort of faster. It's super hard to like make a lot of these comparisons because in a lot of ways like crypto's rebuilding an entire internet versus if you compare crypto to social media, it's like, oh, social media was just one category of the internet. And when you're talking about crypto and blockchain, you're talking about kind of like a completely new internet and tech stack and infrastructure and things that is infinitely bigger than what just social media was. But when I look at the last 3 years, there's been a lot of progress. It's been insane to actually watch the progress and then map that to other industry sort of evolution and the progress of them. And then now with the new election, with Trump's executive order, was sort of, and I'm talking very much from a U.S. standpoint, with the House and the Senate now having more pro crypto candidates than non pro crypto candidates. The number one thing that has held back crypto has been regulation and the uncertainty, because there's been concepts that people have talked about in terms of how they want to build sort of business models, sharing tokens as equity, like just a million things that have been talked about, but people haven't been able to pull the trigger. And a lot of entrepreneurs and investors that aren't as risk on in terms of like, oh, let's go set up an entity in the Cayman Islands and do this weird thing and this weird legal thing to like, there's a whole class of people that just aren't going to build because they're not going to mess with that stuff. As soon as you remove all that away, and the biggest hurdle to crypto progress being regulatory stuff, as soon as you kind of move that all away, there's a strong likelihood that in the next 2 years after these, actually, I think it's already starting because builders and investors are anticipating certain regulatory outcomes. I think in the next 2 years, you could see as much progress as we saw in the last 10.
Which, by the way, is largely due to people already preparing for it that are in the space, and
Exactly.
the new incomers having less friction, so they're able to move that fast. What I find super interesting on that is how are the incentives aligned for that 2 year speed run to actually play out? How do you view that?
Well, I would hope that in the regulatory environment that the incentives would actually get properly aligned in the way that the blockchain and crypto industry has always wanted them, which is the users and the participants in these networks are structurally aligned and incentivized in the same way that the original creators and builders of those protocols and networks are. And because the regulatory, so Bitcoin being a great example of all participants being incentivized and aligned in a really like fair and kind of proper way, but there's only so many use cases and so many sort of ways to build, that there's only so much design space, in other words, right? Until you start to bump up against design space that is a friction against like a law or a regulatory environment. So that would be my hope, is that the incentives actually get aligned properly, because what we've seen the last, I don't know, probably since the ICO boom in 2017, and it's just propagated even more because the regulatory environment is like, nope, you can't issue tokens as equity. What we end up doing is we end up creating these splits, and you have foundations and you have companies and you have equity over here, and you have stock units that kind of represent the form of equity of the tokens in equity, and there's all these different kind of weird structures to get around the regulatory things you have to manage. And then what that ends up doing is it starts to split the users and sort of the network, and then the founders and the investors and the builders, and it starts to divide where value is accrued. And then inevitably, whoever's got the control of the stick, if they start to see value shaping in one in a certain bucket, that's where they're going to go and sort of double down and capture their value. And so that's why I would say the last several years, if not the last 8 years of project launches, more result in like slow rugs or outright rugs. Not I'm not really talking about like the bad actors in terms of like, someone like very maliciously rugs a community. I'm talking more like everybody's well intentioned, but then they start to see where the value is and they have this sort of optionality and they're like, oh, well, all that all the value is going to be over here in the form of stock. And we're going to launch the token, and yeah, we own like 2% of it, but that's not where value is truly going to accrue.
I feel like a lot of the project launches are structured in a way where either if you have to build it with money initially, then you raise money, you raise equity, with it most likely with the token warrant, and then eventually once you have found some kind of traction and you have some kind of marketing going for you, then you just drop a token on top of it, get another liquidity event, and either that you can use to run to infinity, which would have been a public IPO, before, if it's like early internet, or your like big series B, C, D, that we now see. Whereas that also then leads to a token that basically has no intrinsic value because it was just plopped as a liquidity event, as you said,
Yeah.
because it wasn't connected to the underlying like equity at all. Meaning, it is this like slow rug being pulled from
Yeah.
out of you, and there's people just doing that all over, and then that is like the companies and the startups doing it on the builder side. Then there's the investor side of it, like, oh, I can get out of this after 2 years. Oh, this is great. Like, I have a 7-year fund, and I can now, instead of running one round, I can run 3.
Yeah.
So I can raise way more money at a higher fee rate because my potential returns that I'm advertising are way higher. It's like now the investor is also incentivized to go down that like model that
Yeah.
isn't really aligned with the user, and the user is like, well, I could speculate on this and potentially even make money from the initial like marketing hype and run into this. So they're incentivized to just at least play with it initially, but nobody's
Right.
incentivized to long run this.
No. And that's where if we can just make tokens equity, if we can just say tokens can be equity, then that starts to change a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, because then you can't slow run this because, well, you can spike it and you can like spike it back down,
Yeah,
but
there's
like
all
this is
yeah,
your company equity. You would have to found a new legal entity for you to actually pull the rug.
right. And so what's going to happen with the new regulatory environment, at least my prediction is that anything that can be tokenized will be tokenized. So, and that accounts for all future in terms of that statement, and then that also accounts for anything in the past. So if it's possible and it makes sense to create a token for something in the past, we will create a token for it. So what does that mean? It means all stocks and securities get tokenized. And that if all stocks and tokens get, or all stocks and investments and products and all that gets tokenized from a past looking standpoint, and then everything gets sort of tokenized in a sort of a going forward standpoint. And then you have one key thing that is super important to align users with investors is if you can share protocol revenue with token holders. And we've talked about that for a long time. It's just not really clear. It's just not, it's hard to do. It's hard to do in like a really legit. It's impossible to do in sort of a lawful way. And so as soon as you can do that, and it's like, oh well, we need to generate revenue, and if we can just rev share with our community, then the next layer of that is you have to actually build a good product that
Oh,
people want to use.
oh, wait, we're actually getting back to products.
Yeah,
Wait, this is an industry that gets back to actually building products. This is
yeah.
interesting.
Because if exactly, because
So,
that's what the product up until this point, there has been a product, and that product is just a speculation product. So it's still a product, but it's just one
yeah,
dimensional.
and the financials of like you can transfer money has been another one that's
Yeah,
been like growing really big, like stable coins, for example. Like you now have the US dollar that is on a digital, verifiable set of infrastructure that anyone can just connect to and plug into, which is obviously way easier than having a banking license or working with an API company that has a banking license.
Yep.
That for me is a really big unlock. So when I talk to like the more traditional businesses, mostly all over Europe, because I'm in like Switzerland or Germany most of the time, they understand and appreciate the programmability of the money. But then it's always like, well, if my supplier doesn't use it, it doesn't get me anything, because then I need to connect it into my systems, and their systems that they use aren't blockchain ready. Meaning, like, for example, we're now building up, because we're scaling a little bit, a ERP internally, just to get ready to then like already have a system. And what's interesting there is I can't directly ingest bank statements from fintechs. I could from traditional banks, but then the costs are just like it doesn't make sense at all to go with a like really traditional bank, unless I want to take out loans in the future, and then it's interesting to build up that relationship. But the blockchain is so programmable that I could. It's just that the infrastructure isn't there to connect the two. And my suppliers, they oftentimes, even though they're crypto companies, oftentimes I get a wire.
Yep.
So we actually like dog feeding our own stuff. Like I always have like every single invoice I send out, even if it's a Web2 company, if it's a whatever company, brick and mortar, there is a line that says you can pay this on this link using like USDC or like crypto or whatever currency. Some are in euro. They don't, because the friction for them is still too high. So like if we can remove that, then we will get all of the benefits out of the programmability, I feel like.
Right. Right. Which were, again, like so much of this is just like the regulatory landscape has made it super hard for people to build all these little things and invest in a long term kind of way. What you said earlier is everybody's like on this 2 year kind of like strategy. But that's just because of the way the incentives have been set up. As soon as you set up a structure where it's like, okay, well, you can invest on a 10-year product strategy and company time horizon, and you could potentially build $1 trillion asset. Oh, people are going to be like, hell yeah, I'll go for that. I'll put my hat in the ring for that versus just a 2 year, oh, tens of millions or 100 million, sort of like, these smaller chip shot returns, right? Because that's the incentives. So yeah, I'm super pumped. And then from I don't know what else we want to talk about here other than sort of that. But I'm very at this point I'm very optimistic about what is going to be possible to be built, and a lot of ideas that people have discussed that haven't truly been able to be pursued simply because of the regulatory landscape. So I think we're in for a hell of a couple of years.
We've got connected through mini apps. Would you mind giving an introduction to what mini apps are?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of mini apps, so you've got like, let's start with the large app. So you have these apps that we use that have like a lot of users, and they're large, and you know them. They're like Telegram and Twitter and all these sort of familiar apps. So a mini app is just the idea of a micro experience of some sort within one of those larger apps. So a mini app solves some sort of use case or user need, whether that need is, oh, I need to be entertained for the next 3 minutes, or I need to do something like order an Uber through, Telegram or something like that, some sort of functional, more like, some sort of functional need. Right now, a lot of mini apps are more in the entertainment, sort of like
Yep.
solving for the need to be entertained. But that's how I would kind of just at a high level talk about mini apps.
When you look at those and you're like, well, they're the large apps you're mostly familiar with, right? Like MySpace coming up, Facebook, Instagram. YouTube most likely. I'm not sure how you stand on live streaming and Twitch being like especially a like high growth lever since ever since COVID. But even before that, I'm a like huge gamer, so I just saw it all as it came up because it mostly comes out of that industry. Um, so how do you actually go from that initial experience and then you go up?
Yeah, I think the sort of the what a builder might like from a mini app standpoint is the potential to aggregate users across a lot of larger apps. And in that sense, it's like, oh, we're not really a mini app. We're a mini app within 10 other apps. And not every WhatsApp user uses Telegram, and not every Telegram user uses WhatsApp, and not every live streamer on Twitch, whether they consume the content or create the content, is also live streaming over on YouTube, right? So we know that there's fragmentation of users across all of these larger apps. And so the hope and dream for someone building mini apps is this ability to aggregate, users, and in a way create, extend their reach because of that fragmentation that naturally exists. And in that sense, you can become quite large. Now, the problem that we've always seen, always, is that the relationship with the customer is the most important thing. Whoever has the relationship with the customer is going to win. And this is not an internet thing. IKEA perfected this a long time ago. And IKEA said, oh, look at this huge supply chain and blah, 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 all this stuff. And from day one, the founder of IKEA had the relationship with the customer. And then he just backfilled and he built his company backwards from the relationship with the customer, right? So I think, I think mini apps are great. I love the idea of mini apps. The biggest risk, though, for mini app builders and companies is that, do you own the relationship with the customer? Now, in the Web 2 sense, no, you definitely don't own the relationship with the customer. But in the Web 3 sense, it's like, wait a second. If we're running this on blockchain stuff and we have interoperability and all these fancy words, then yeah, I do have the relationship, potentially have the relationship with the customer. Now, there's a technical relationship with the customer, and then there's a mind relationship with the customer. And those are two very different things.
That to me is really, really interesting because on the mind side, if I have to open, say, Telegram to get to your app, I have a relationship with Telegram
Yeah.
to you as a utility inside of Telegram. If you then also have a mobile app and for some functionality, I need to get the mobile app, get out of it, and the experience is just way greater, then I also start building a relationship with you. While
Right.
on the technical side, maybe the company doesn't even have a relationship with Telegram outside of it just working there. But then the
Yep.
incentives of the like token structure, equity, and all of it now come back in because you can circumvent that like Telegram association with it potentially.
Exactly. And so we can look back in history and business and categories, and we can argue every scenario, and we can find examples for every scenario. And we should, in terms of like builders and like trying to prepare for certain scenarios and outcomes. So, for example, let's look at cable TV. So the cable provider is like Telegram. They're the super app. And then all the cable channels are the mini apps, right? And then the number one mini app or cable channel, at least in the US, that users have a relationship with, like I have more of a relationship with this cable channel than I do with my cable provider, is ESPN, the sports network. So if you were to look at the cable provider and you were to break down the revenue that they pay to all of their cable networks, ESPN's going to get like $7, $8. These stats are a bit old, but like the ratios still make sense. $7 to $8 per cable subscriber. So the cable subscriber pays $230, $200 to the to the cable network. ESPN gets $7 of that. The next closest cable channel gets like $1, right? Why is that? It's because ESPN has been able to circumvent the relationship, not from a technical standpoint, because they technically do not have a relationship with the customer. They do not have the customer's data, right? At least, before ESPN was able to have their own app. What they were able to do is they were able to own the relationship in the mind with the customer.
That in this day and age also applies to influencers and creators, right? Because they're the cable channels now on the Instagrams.
Right. So if we wind it back and we talk about mini apps in the blockchain sense, now that we know those two concepts, we know that there's a technical relationship with the customer, and then we know that there's a mind relationship with the customer. And you can have both, or you can have one or the other. If you have the technical relationship and not the mind relationship, then usually you use coercion to win.
Can you give examples for that?
Telegram and them kicking out all other blockchains and saying you have to use their blockchain.
But then that means Telegram is winning, not you.
Exactly. Right. And in this sense, there's several losers with Telegram and kind of the decision they made with blockchain. Think of it as like all the blockchains that were being used, those are products and teams, right? But they didn't really have the relationship with the customer. Telegram had the relationship with the customer. So Telegram then prioritized their blockchain over other blockchains. Why? Because they had the relationship with the customer, both in terms of mind, but then also in terms of technicality. And so in order for these other blockchains to succeed, they have to say, oh, how do we not just have a technical relationship? Because in a way they did have some sort of technical touch point. Granted, there was a layer that was, got stripped out for that. But then now let's go and look at something like Farcaster and Warpcast. Well, the Farcaster team has spent an enormous amount of time trying to secure both the technical and the mind share relationship with the customer by building Warpcast, right?
Because a lot of what they do, though, is they market themselves as Farcaster, though. They just say you have to use Warpcast. So yes, they have the technical as well, though they at least try to bring the user relationship to the Farcaster itself, the protocol. So that it then is a little more shared because anyone can technically tap into it. It's like kind of like you can run your own cable provider on top of it. It's just, as we all know, not as easy to just spin up a cable provider tomorrow. But they try to have that mental separation. Actually, I've seen that it doesn't really work for the user. They say they post to Webcast. So like they have, a lot of users have that mental connection.
Right. And, at the end of the day, how important, because there's multiple sets of users. We're talking about the dev builder as a user, and then we're talking about the consumer that just wants content, that just wants to be entertained, right? And so what you just mentioned is definitely the consumer, the person that just wants to be entertained. They know Warpcast, and then sort of the dev and the builder community knows a bit more Farcaster. So I think the main thing for everybody to kind of think about is I think that builders and entrepreneurs, and especially technical people, they get super wrapped up in the technical side and the technical relationship. And that's important. But you can also have tremendous success when you own the relationship in the customer, when the customer thinks of you first. And the reality is, there's only so much we can hold in our brain. So you've got to come up with lots of clever ways. And these clever ways can be, products and experiences. It can be content. There's a lot of clever ways to basically become sticky into someone's mind. But the number one thing is whether it's a product feature or some sort of technical way you become sticky, or it's a content idea or whatever. The number one thing is you have to take a risk. If you're not taking a risk, if it doesn't feel risky, you're not going to become sticky in someone's mind. And this goes for the type of content that you create, as well as maybe a technical kind of thing or experience that you build. From a content perspective, there was a clothing brand called American Apparel in the US. Yeah. And one of the ways, so they're just selling t-shirts. Okay. Well, t-shirts aren't new. Oh, it's a different fabric. It's a slightly different color. Oh, the seam is here instead of here, right? There's not a lot you can do that's like risky or different, and so you're not going to become sticky. So what did they do? They they went super edgy in their content, and they very sexualized, just like t-shirts, and they built it all. But they went and in a lot of ways, like their ads, they got criticized a lot for their ads. They got criticized a ton for their marketing efforts, but they got super risky in how they talked and what they said and all that stuff. So if you want if in terms of just like, okay, I'm a builder, I've got to attract users, whether those users are devs or they're an end consumer, you have to go, we have to take risks. And from a content perspective, that's where I focus on. So when I work with clients, I'm like, what are we doing that's risky from a content perspective? If this doesn't make you go, oh, I don't know, then it's not necessarily a good idea. And you'd be surprised at how many people, they love to take risks in their career working in crypto, but then they don't want to take like a content risk.
Yeah, I see that a lot. It's like small teams that come up to us on like a product and development side, and they're like, okay, yeah, we want to build this, and we need to figure out how we actually can go to a market and like get users here. And I'm like, well, you can take this new social media platform that's here that actually has a lot of crypto users and has features built in. It's called Farcaster. We can put you inside of Webcast, and you can get a few users, probably. Like we had a bunch of launches, have 1,000 users in the first like day. Matthew Fox had very more like gamified launches that just like blew up, where he did like $200,000 of volume in like 24 hours. It's like, that's trading volume, like huge amounts of users. So that is great.
Yeah.
So that to me is really interesting, where you can get a bunch of those users by taking that risk on the platform itself that just may not be too big.
Right, exactly. And the reality is, like, when you talk about these risks, it's not taking like one risk and saying, oh, this is the big risk. It's actually saying, how can we take lots of risks? Because the reality is, when you're taking a risk, it might not work. So whether it's, hey, we're going to build on Farcaster and we're going to take this risk, it should be, whatever you're doing should be in a portfolio of risky things. And none of those one things necessarily should kill you as a company or a builder. That said, every company and every person at some point does hit okay, we have one shot left. There's one bullet left in the gun. There's one more, whatever. There's only one more dollar in the bank or whatever. And you have to take, your kind of final risk, and you have to bet it all, per se. But hopefully before you get to that point, you're taking lots and lots and lots of mini risks, and then you start to double down wherever you see a little bit of traction. And that goes for content strategy, as well as building what platform you choose on or what kind of products you build.
I think a lot of that also becomes, people think that they have to choose one, where they could just choose all.
Yeah.
on some sense, yes, right? Like you have to focus, you have limited amounts of time, but in the end, you can play on a lot of playgrounds without just splurging your focus too far.
Yep. 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 Totally. So, I mean, I'm super excited about Farcaster. I will say that over the last, I spent a lot of time on Farcaster in 2024, definitely like the second half. And then towards the end of the year, I'll be honest, I started gravitating back to X. Um, and, there's a few, there's definitely like, the thing about Farcaster and Warpcast is there's a passionate community. There's users and there's builders, but it hasn't. I'd be curious what your take is on this. Like currently within Farcaster and Warpcast, what's the biggest example of scale that someone has seen building on the platform?
Purely on top of it, or like including like building a mini app that's also in Telegram, in World, and these other ecosystems.
Both.
In terms of that, then you're hitting 500,000 users across Telegram, Farcaster, and other ecosystems. That's Farcade. I could say just like think about an arcade. You go in there, you play games, but inside of other apps.
Mm,
And if you're thinking single, just purely within Farcaster, it's probably a few thousand daily active users, like roughly like 500 to 1,000 daily active users outside of the core Farcaster app. If you're building standalone, so like
got
you're
it.
in the mid hundreds. If you're building on top of it, just purely on top of it, you can reach like 1,000 to 2,000 daily actives, maybe up to 5,000 daily actives, which can drive like the Clanker team, like their token, like they started as like a token launchpad. They drove roughly $20 million in revenue over a month.
Yeah.
Probably way faster, but I don't want to butcher the timeline.
Yeah.
So, but that is like large scale. If you think in crypto and the like indie hacker scene, if you think
Yeah.
global business, that doesn't
Right.
even move the needle, right?
Right. Which is not really even a fair comparison
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah, but
compare
like,
sort of like,
$20 million is a lot of money to make in a month, right?
well, and yeah, and to start there, right? And then you
Yeah,
kind of evolve. You're like, okay, well, where does the next 20 100 million come from? Oh, it might not come from Farcaster right now.
yeah,
Farcaster is one of those deals. It's like, well, they raised it $1 billion valuation. That wasn't because of Warpcast. That was because of the protocol and their vision at the protocol level.
yeah.
Which I'd be curious, like, what do you think the vision of the protocol level is?
Well, the vision that's always communicated is the vision that it should be the underlying fabric for all social experiences, meaning the Twitters of the world, the Instagrams of the world we now know, move onto this technical fabric. So like the next generation of those platforms will move there. That's the overall vision, and they want to capture the Twitter/X part of it with Webcast.
Do you think the Farcaster protocol and team, do they see a world where X moves includes Farcaster in their tech stack or moves onto Farcaster in some way, or do they think no, we're just gonna like more power the next wave of apps, and these kind of current incumbents are kind of like, they're the incumbents. They're not going to change as quickly, and they might not ever change, and they might just kind of. Do you think that Farcaster sees existing Web 2 social platforms ever kind of moving on to the Farcaster protocol?
My read on it is that it's more the former, so they don't see them move over just because they already have such a huge network that they're able to monetize by what they. It's like why bring their content liquidity inside of this open system while they could just silo it before and just monetize it the way that they want to monetize it. I don't feel like they will jump the paradigm mentally to say like, oh no, this is like now all open and shared, which means we get way more content, which means our app is better because we own the relationship to the user in like mobile phone or web. We can still monetize. I think that mental model still like will not click in those companies. So it's most likely going to be more like, oh no, like replace, or multiple systems, multiple ecosystems.
So going back to Farcon, or not Farcon, Farcade,
Yep.
and you're talking about them as like one of the larger examples of apps that build on top of sort of both Farcaster and Telegram. So with Telegram's move to go to like prioritize their own blockchain, did that totally like basically was that like a nuke for Farcade?
Nope. Farcade currently doesn't have blockchain features. So
Okay, so they're just building on top.
they're just using the mini app format. They have an arcade, and they will launch an AI-enabled studio for you to just go in and like prompt your own video games and like reincarnation of the games. So you could take, for example, a Tetris and then make it your own logos or just adjust it a little bit to how you want it.
Okay. So in terms of how Farcade built on Warpcast and Farcaster, that's just mini apps, and it's just like there's some underlying blockchain stuff that's kind of, I guess, being used by the
It's
user, but the team isn't
yes,
building anything.
not as of anything public that one can see today. They have tickets. They have like in like currencies. They have a leaderboard. Like currencies in the sense of you have some coins in there, which may or may not eventually turn into something. We'll see. But it's not like there's a direct like wallet connection or something like with blockchain enabled in it today. They're just a mini app in that ecosystem in multiple ones distributed across that just leverages the users that they can get all over and combine them. And then they use the public open social protocol to pull in the user data so that if you already log in, it shows your username, you don't have to type it, they know your friends, you can easily share it to your friends and all of that.
Got it. So, okay, I wanted to ask you also, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you about Farcon. When is that? Where is it? What do you
Yep.
expect?
Well, Farcon is like the yearly gathering of all Farcaster people. There was one 2 years ago in Boston, which was quite small. I wasn't there. I wasn't on Farcaster at the time. Last year's was in May in Venice, and this year's is going to be first of May in New York.
Oh, New York. Okay, cool.
Yep. What I expect is just like a lot of the developer types, the crypto folks, and the users to just come together and jam on how can this like social protocol really work. Where can we go? What are you seeing? What works? What doesn't? There's a lot of crypto people on the network as well, so there's a lot of exchange in that, and how do crypto products and user experiences actually play out. So to me, it's more of a conference about consumer product and consumer product vision with the social sprinkled in and a lot of just people
Mm.
in the crypto space.
I think that's a good way to position Farcon is like more of a consumer crypto conversation than just like a Web3 social.
Yeah, that's
Knowing that
the
knowing that Web3 social is a huge part of consumer. I mean, social.
yeah, that's my way of saying it. How it's viewed from the outside a lot is a classmate of people on Farcaster.
Yeah.
So and you do have both, obviously, because if you spend a bunch of time online in the same community, talking about the same things, facing the same struggles, and like being on video calls weekly or monthly, then it's gonna
What's
feel a little bit.
what's your prediction for Farcaster over the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
The team really focuses a lot on growing with crypto. So like right now, the biggest marketing push is make money, then make friends. Which to me is a little bit of a splash in the pan in the terms of like making money can like doesn't really scale, like it's hard to scale making money. Fintechs have tried, maybe with crypto being hyper financialized that works. The making friends after though that could scale. So if you can get a lot of people in through the like quote unquote incentive of speculation and then they stay around for friends, which actually has worked with a bunch of the coins and tokens that came out of Farcaster, though the app itself has to be way more retentive to enable that, and that's currently the
Yeah,
biggest struggle.
because
And on the
because you
positive
got
side, there's way more businesses actually coming in and wanting to play around with mini apps because they give them way better distribution than they can
right.
have on Twitter or other platforms, especially since you can send mobile notifications to your users, which if you're building just a web page, you can't. If you connect Twitter you can't really cold DM everyone and ping them. Now you have access to the in-app notification screen where usually just replies and likes and all of that live. And so that's powerful. And crypto teams want to use that. So that's like the upside. And then people coming in, cool experiences, and that funnels. On the user side, it's like, oh, that marketing angle just may or may not work. We'll figure that out.
Yeah, I'm always I find it funny how many apps and sort of things get built over in the Farcaster, and then how much the conversation on X happens about that thing.
It actually isn't much. Like the conversation happening on X about the thing being built on Farcaster isn't really as active as the one on Farcaster about the thing being built on Farcaster. And the way the conversation triggers over is a bunch of people from the Farcaster realm communicated the same way that they do on Farcaster, which obviously doesn't run on X because they don't have all the context. So that's one of the biggest hurdles to adoption is like, well, how do you take the cool things built and communicate it? Because every time that they're communicated in a way the crypto X or general like audience understands, it's like super, super cool. Like if you look at what Matthew Fox did with trivia, that works. Like it's, oh, now you have your social media app, you open it, you now have this like two hosts and you play trivia inside of it, you answer questions. Because all of the like underlying protocol connects it in a way that you now can get money out of it when you want directly, like no need to actually like enter your bank account or whatever, because it's crypto under the hood. That is an experience. If you communicate it that way, it's really cool and works.
Yeah.
But it's mostly not communicated that way.
Right. Right. So yeah, what do you think? Where's Farcaster in the next? You kind of saw, you said first make money, then make friends.
Yeah, for me, that's where they're going and where the team is headed. What's way more interesting to me is reducing the friction out of every single app. It's like if you take the possibilities that open up, especially if there is new regulation or really cool experiences enabled, then if you take the friction out of it because it's in a social media app, you put it in a mini app. Well, that's great, and that's I think where we're going. It's like a lot more experiences to do in app.
Have you started, or did you get an invite to Yapster?
No, I have no Yepster right now.
No, yeah, neither do I. I'm still waiting on that. I find it fascinating that, if we just rewind a couple of years ago, I'm talking like 2 years ago, you couldn't do anything from a crypto standpoint inside a mobile app. Like, I think it might have been 2023, the summer of 2023, maybe 2022, when Android and iOS started to allow like kind of crypto type behavior inside of their mobile operating systems. And in order for crypto to scale, crypto has to have a mobile strategy. That's where
Yeah,
everybody's time.
that is still harsh. Like if you read the App Store regulation on it, as long as you like, give Apple the 30% cut, you're mostly fine. Though if you're issuing financial products and you're not licensed, so
Yeah,
it's a really really tight rope. How you
that's
typically navigate it is you just hide a lot of that, or like make sure it's like rather late in the process. But then are you really, or you just build a wallet?
right. That's my
So,
that's my biggest
yeah.
question to people that are smarter than me about sort of the technical side of
But
things
fa-
is that
to me, Farcaster could solve that for you, though. Like, why
okay.
you could have a mobile structure by being in a social media app that gets you a lot of users and gets you into that app, and then
Well,
now you're on
that
mobile in the App Store.
yeah, and that's the biggest. If we're talking from an industry standpoint, consumers spend the vast amount of time on their phone. So if crypto is not on your phone, crypto's never going
Yep,
big.
yep, yep.
So that's usually when I talk to people who are smarter than me, I'm like, tell me about the how we can do all of this
Well,
from a mobile standpoint, and what are the limits and what are the hurdles and what needs to happen in order to just make all of this mobile.
Yeah, I feel like Farcaster being mobile first in that is really great. That helps. Also, it's you build a web page to be inside of this app as like a mini app, so that also works as a standalone web app in mobile. Well, now you probably want a mobile app, but then you have to check the regulations of the App Store and all of it. So if you can funnel into the App Store with, say, being inside of Webcast, that may be a good mobile strategy to get people in and then have them go to your webpage while you build out a mobile app with the funding that you get through having the initial traction.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense.
So, yeah, so as a builder, that's probably the route to go if you really want to use that distribution. And if you're a user, well, it has to be fun, right? And the app has to be great. So that's
Right.
where we're currently in this limbo of like, Farcaster needs way more content and users for builders to build way greater products, and the users want way greater products because of the content they can have elsewhere.
And that's where you see teams like Yapster, where apparently, from what the conversation I hear on X, is the UX, the experience, the game. Um, but that's a team kind of focused on building in sort of the actual consumer experience. They're not building a protocol and
No,
just
no, no.
app
It's
or anything.
they built an app that is blockchain enabled. The coins can then go out, but the actual app is their mechanism of like the meme of the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like as a closing note, what is the most interesting thing you see inside of the blockchain industry?
Um, to me, the most interesting thing we touched on it earlier, and it's not like the sexiest thing, but for someone who's been in the space and like working full time in the space and bumping up against a lot of challenges, the most interesting thing to me is what is going to happen with regulation and what is that going to unlock. And then all the shiny objects, which is like I think more of the answer that you wanted. um, I think that there's a new batch of shiny objects and interesting things that fit more with like the question that you really want or the answer for your question, and that the most interesting things we have yet to see. We'll see them in 6 to 18 months. And as I would be very cautious as a builder, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, getting excited about things built right now and that are live right now. They launched this month. And the reason is because they're built under the old rules and under the old paradigms. And to me, the fabric of the rules and the paradigms are changing drastically over the next 12 months. And that is just going to unleash sort of a whole new set of opportunities. So that's what I'm most excited about. I'm basically looking at the regulations, and I want to I want to say this. I have never been like a big regulation, like reading regulations and like looking at that sort of stuff. This is very new behavior for me. This is not like, oh, I've been, I didn't look at any sort of regulations. I'm serious for like a long time. And so like the last, I would say 2 or 3 months, and right now, I'm looking at it super close, and that's my spidey sense. I've always had a pretty good spidey sense in terms of like where to point my attention to, and right now my attention is saying, pay attention to regulation, and but more importantly, how that changes the design space and how that changes the incentives and what is possible under a completely like a good way to go about it would be to imagine the perfect regulatory sort of scenario and changes of like the perfect thing for crypto. I would also say like imagine it from the standpoint of what would be the incentive for the US, because going back to incentives,
I think a lot of
imagine
the incentive there is US dollar entrenchment.
Yeah,
Like
that's
with,
number one.
so
That's number one.
so
For sure.
anything currently holding you off from stable coins will get regulated in a way to allow the US dollar to be a stable coin that just fully works.
Yeah, yeah,
I fully believe that.
exactly. So that's what I'm most excited about is what are the unlocks from this? What's the new design space look like, and how do people start building from there?
It's a lovely mental model to close on, where you're saying instead of just surfing on top of the Hoover Dam, imagine the Hoover Dam breaking and like the flood being a full-on joy to ride, and you catch that wave.
Yeah, yeah. So those are the conversations that I'm more interested in having with investors and builders. Is not what's the cool thing. Like, hey, I don't care what the cool thing is right now because it was built under different rules and paradigms. Tell me what is now possible, assuming all the rules and paradigms are now changing. That's what I want to talk about.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you so much for that lovely conversation, for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What's the one page you want to send people to learn more about you?
My Twitter, which is at Jeff Kauffman Jr. Jr. That's a good place to find me. There's a bunch of links kind of there as well. And yeah, so shoot me a DM or give me a follow. I always want more followers.
Pump the numbers.
Just kidding. Don't follow me. Block me. Go find me and block me right now. I'm coming for you. I'm gonna troll you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening, and thanks for the guests for coming on to Techsuite for the C-Suite. In the description below, or the show notes, whatever you want to call them, you will find the awesome resources our guests mentioned to get you started. You can find links to our guests, and you all can also find a summary, takeaways, and other links to keep connected with the show. Thank you so much for listening. Have an awesome day.